Hello, every folks, and good morning. Welcome to another edition of Know Your Unit Reborn. Today we are talking about the Swordmaster. Okay, so Swordmaster is a bit of an odd duck throughout the series. They've had a bit of a different identity every single time. They basically like to set up this whole idea of this kind of samurai type of deal, but they can never quite decide which aspect of those memes they want to go and kind of follow down. Back on the original SNES, they basically were just a straight up samurai guy, samurai armor, everything else, shooting out sword lasers and whatnot. Yeah, kind of cool looking unit. A bit of an odd duck. Typically less favored towards the end of the game, but still, Master Samurai were a pretty handy frontliner. Funnily enough, they were one of the few units that had a self-damaging attack. Then you had them over in Knight of Lotus, where they were kind of nutty overpowered, having access to a lot of different offensive support magic, having access to some of the heaviest hits in the game, having some of the best damage scaling in that one, and yeah, generally having access to every weapon, because there were no restrictions in Knight of Lotus, but looking extra cool whenever using swords. Then in the SNES version, they were the guy that was able to use 2 regular swords, and that was kind of cool. They could just dual wield stuff. And I think for them it was specifically swords. I think it was ninjas that could dual wield everything. I forget exactly. Didn't use Swordmasters much in SNES, but once again they got access to some support magic. Like many classes in the original release, they were kind of like there in concept, but a little bit half-baked. Then in Knight of Lotus, or not in Knight of Lotus, in PSP, they were the dodgy guy, and yeah, very hard to keep functioning in that game. And then we have Reborn. Yes, we're skipping over the complications of One Vision for right now. We'll get to that one later. Now, Reborn, what is their deal here? They are effectively a kind of retooled reverse of what they were back in PSP. Namely, instead of relying on doing damage to be able to keep themselves funded, they more or less keep their MP funded by means of doing damage. So in their case, they're taking advantage of a fun little MP quirk where every time you hit something, you will generate a little bit of MP. The harder you hit, along with some RNG, the more MP you'll end up regaining. In their particular case, they can potentially attack twice consistently. They're the only class that's able to consistently attack multiple times, potentially per round, without any actual cap on how many times it will work. So, for example, if you have Preempt activated and you have Mind's Eye activated, anytime that they are physically attacked, they instead will just attack instead. Now, seeing as their weapon has a counterattack, this also means that they will attack twice instead of being attacked once. So this isn't for the purpose of damage, though, because this class is a very odd duck, because they're a support unit. Essentially, they are there to keep everybody else functioning in different ways, as well as applying debuffs, and primarily would only be looking to directly attack through means of their finishers. Kind of similar to a few other classes, especially somebody like the Ranger in that way, where attempting to just attack something regularly will be pretty disappointing, but their finishers are pretty darn reliable. Stone Bloom is great for shutting things down. Sun Blossom is great for hitting things with False Strike. Essentially, Sun Blossom is, in my opinion, the best endgame kind of False Strike ability. I do still consider something like the False Strike Cutlass to be useful in the later parts of the game, but in their particular case, this is a finisher that can apply it with a far stronger weapon, throughout the entire experience there. And then you have Ghost Whale, which will basically delete anything with a light element attached to it. Let's go ahead and go over their skills here real quick, because it's not a very long list. They only get access to two-handed katanas. They are the only class outside of Lord that gets access to the two-handed katanas. And they're not a weapon class that's necessarily too special in terms of what they are. They are more of a limitation, a handicap, a quirk to the class, more so than anything else. However, they do carry many things that other weapons do. For example, they have a silencing weapon, just like the daggers, through their Mage Blade over here. They have access to a stun weapon, like basically everybody does, through the Superior Helm Hammer over here. And additionally, they're going to have many different elemental variants, including one that allows them to cast Tier 1 summons over here in their spell swords. There are quite a few more than this. I did not get very lucky with the drops this time around. But either way, there's a lot of different crafted as well as relic variants. As always, the rule is fairly straightforward here, that if you are going to match that particular element, or rather, if you have a low-tier elemental weapon like this, go ahead and match the element. It's only the later ones that are able to be useful for split element type setups. But personally, I feel like Dark Swordmaster with a Sweet Blade is probably going to be some of the best overall punishment that they can put out, combining an anatomy bonus as well as an elemental bonus. Again, you can go multiple element with this, but the fact that it's also using a Hellhound on here means that it's kind of good to have them as a dark element here. But something like a Cursed 2 HK would definitely be perfect in their hands, just courtesy of how they work. So going back over those skills here, they have the first rank of Constitution, so not really something you'd be using that often. Usually 120 health is not going to be the game changer that they would particularly want. Insight's useful for revive strats, as you do. They do have access to Steadfast, which I would recommend keeping on there regularly because one of their big gimmicks is being able to outfight stuff at melee range, and you don't want them to die to a sudden crit. Siege is actually not terrible on this unit. If you have a case where there's no death drops, I actually would recommend putting Siege on there. It might put them into a better position depending on the situation. Resist Petrify and resist Charm, as always, to deal with chickens and fairies. But then we have Preempt, which is going to be their kind of main bread and butter here, the move that allows them to attack first when they're getting attacked physically. This doesn't apply to finishers, this doesn't apply to skills, spells, all that kind of thing, it's just basic melee attacks, which is very handy pretty much throughout the entire game. As much as there's often this, big hullabaloo, whatever, over how everything's only casting magic all the time, there is a way bigger shift in this game towards regular physical attacks happening more often than they did in previous versions. So personally, I was still using Preempt going through Sand Bronze and whatnot, basically due to being a somewhat, not quite squishy, but on the squishier side of things, character. They will get targeted by things like griffins and cockatrices. This means that they're pretty good at pulling aggro themselves, and something like Preempt ends up working out really darn well. Skill cards are common, they're going to be the main thing that you can go pick up from pretty much any map. And something like Preempt and Mind's Eye will regularly see them attacking multiple times, generating a lot of MP to fund their dances and finishers, while essentially avoiding damage themselves. So it's a very useful thing. If you want to potentially throw out some debuffs in the middle of that, you have stuff like the Mage Blade and the Helm Haver to be able to throw out Silence or Stun. While they do have a 100% chance ability here, I wouldn't recommend necessarily running this. Simply put, because it will give you the knockback that you're looking for if you want to avoid running something like Mind's Eye. I don't find that as reliable as Mind's Eye itself. For those that weren't around in the PSP days, Fall Blade is effectively the skillified version of how you used to build them, namely that you'd give them 100% knockback, as well as a Preempt. In this case, you just go and guarantee your Preempt, you activate their Fall Blade, which is funny because Fall Blade literally takes the same amount of MP as Preempt. Actually, I think Preempt was 30 before. I can't remember if Preempt was... I think it was 40. I don't know, it's been a bit of a hot minute. I can't remember which one changed Preempt to 30, whether it was PSP or One Vision. Anyway, so you would put Fall Blade on there, you'd put Preempt on there, it knocks them backwards, they don't get to attack, but personally I think Preempt and Mind's Eye is just better. Essentially, they attack, you dodge it, then you attack again. Either way, that's entirely up to you. This one's the more expensive option, and they don't get a dance out of it. This consistently keeps their MP running. Then you have Mighty Strike on there as well, increasing the attack rating of their sword by 25%. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this was not their total value going by 25%, but I think it was their weapons attack value or something going up by 25%. Not 100% sure on that one. Either way, this one is kind of an extra slot filler. Personally, in Olivia's case here, due to having her fancier sword, I typically will put this on her on cases where there aren't death drops. But for my other Swordmaster over here, I typically will end up just running something like Preempt and Fall Blade on him because he can guarantee the stun effect on his sword. So, again, it depends on what you're running there exactly. I did have another guy before this, but he died. Alright. As far as equipment access goes, they have access to pretty much exclusively middle-of-the-road armor, as well as some lighter casting variants, like the Circlet. Typically, you'll see them running helmet, vest, gloves, and light shoes. They don't even have access to stuff like the Dragon Scale gear. You can get some better equipment on them. Like the Water Greaves are going to be a solid defensive option for them. Let's see, it seems they can equip the Shadow Greaves, Earth Greaves as well, so most of these they can work with. Alluring, I don't typically like running on these guys, even though they do provide a mind boost. So an interesting quirk of this class is going to be that their entire spell list here is going to be functioning pretty much exclusively off of mind. So Harvest Dance is more or less just a 100 health heal, give or take. It goes up or down slightly. But Harvest Dance is just going to be a quick little like heal 1 in an area. It's cheap, it's regularly available, it only costs 25 MP, so it's a very low-cost, kind of spread-out heal. It's a general support move. This isn't going to be something that you use to counter a boss or something like that. This is primarily okay, everyone can just use a little bit of a top-up right now type of ability. It's not sexy by any means, but it is a very efficient heal. Next we have something like, here, let's just go down the list normally. So Lion Dance is going to be very strong if you happen to be running a lot of physical units, especially if you happen to be running a lot of ranged units and you're running Terenites as well. Essentially Strengthen, it primarily comes online when you have both Breach as well as Fear getting activated. So if you are marking targets with a couple of Terenites with the Breach Fear combo, something like this will just basically be an extra 20% damage that you can just throw out by round 2. Obviously, depending on what you're doing. But either way, it's something that's going to be very quick to bring online. If you are running a lot of squishies, again, Bellows Dance will also work great for that, giving just everybody the general Fortify buff. Usually very handy when there's bosses with high-power archers and things like that. This typically won't be enough to completely blunt something along the lines of a boss hitting you or whatever else, but something like Invigorating Dance will be. We'll get to that in just a moment. But they've also got Comely Dance, which will inflict Breach. They've got Bedeviling Dance, which will inflict Slow. They've got Invigorating Dance, which will inflict Weaken. And then they've got Demon Petal Dance, which will Charm. Now, the thing is, all of these will be a mind check in order to land. And being a primarily physical class, they don't exactly get access to, the best mind gear in the world. Now, this will vary. They certainly have some bits of gear that'll give you a very slight boost, but typically in most situations I would recommend running them with as high of a mind as possible, so ideally something like a Ring of the Mind, to improve their hit odds, but on top of that, keep Spell Strike Powder on hand. Because every one of these abilities that they'll end up using, usually you only need to make them happen once per fight in an area in order to have them basically change the entire fight in your favor. This isn't something that they need to be casting all the time, and due to the cost at 40, it's something that you won't necessarily be casting all the time. But something like Invigorating Dance with Spell Strike Powder was very, very key for getting through Palace of the Dead with the minimum stats file. Because I would send a couple of Swordmasters up front. They would just do their Invigorating and their, what the hell was the other one called? Their Comely Dances. Essentially doing Weaken and Breach. And even the over-leveled Griffins and Cockatrices and stuff like that basically melted like butter at that point, because debuffs are exceptionally strong in this game, and something like Weaken will take them from doing, 300 to everybody in an area to doing like 100. There's a lot of little thresholds that are, kind of complicated to get into, but generally speaking, as far as Invigorating Dance goes, when I say they're difficult to get into, I mean that is a level of math that I don't want to even bother trying to figure out myself. So typically it's just, okay, thing hits hard, you hit it with a Weaken, and yeah, it's suddenly not a threat anymore. And this includes basically every enemy in the game. Nobody can resist Weaken. Nobody can resist Breach. So, very, very strong. Demon Petal, by the way, is dropped, as far as I'm aware, by one guy in the entire game, which is a little bit of an odd one. This is something that you used to be able to just buy in the store, and it's potentially one of their most overpowered abilities, being something that the Fairy as well as the Angel Knight can do as well, which is an AoE charm. In their case, it is, I believe, the second most expensive version of this, but they're also able to regularly fund it. So if you have something like a Spell Strike Powder, they can easily take multiple turns, charming multiple units. So very, very strong ability. It's the Swordmaster guy that's in Tardy's boss fight in, what was it, Heim, I think, that has this. I actually was convinced for the longest time that it was just straight up removed from the game until it was showing up on drop lists. But yeah, Demon Petal is still here. Pretty much, I believe every dance is here outside of the super weird ones that are like, here's an area stagger. Great, I'm sure somebody will use that. So yeah, there's that too. So yeah, that's kind of what we're working with here. This is a class that you generally want to have float around the kind of sides of the party, buffing everybody up wherever they can, but trying to keep some MP in check in order to be able to inflict those big debuffs when needed. You want to have them prepare with something like a spell strike beforehand in order to make sure that they can land those debuffs wherever they're needed. They're not a primary fighter. They fight in order to train their mind, and then they use their mind to break the bodies of the things around them. They are absolutely the martial arts stereotype, and I love that. It doesn't have to make sense, it's just how this stuff works. And yes, I did keep a Brand of the Sacrifice on her specifically, because in those annoying cases where you happen to be at like 39 MP and don't have the Invigorating Dance and you need something broken, it doesn't hurt to have that item on hand anyway. Another little note here is that Fairy Scale Powder actually does improve the Harvest Stance. It's not by much, it's like 20% or so you're getting like 120, 130 on your heals, but again, this can potentially matter under some circumstances. If your problem is attrition, like in POTD, there were several situations where there were a lot of very attrition-heavy maps, and I found the answer in a few cases to just be to have two Swordmasters spamming Harvest Stance, because their heals are very, very, very efficient, pretty much only getting beat out by something like Escalating Sonnet. So either way, that's kind of my 2 cents on that whole thing. I really love the way that they redid this class. This is probably my favorite that they've been throughout the entire series, just because they finally nailed down that kind of martial arts feel of just like they're fighting to improve their mind kind of thing, which is really the justification everybody uses for just going and beating the shit out of each other in public. But hey, it's fun. Anyway, so y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and yeah, don't forget that these guys are pretty handy with stuff like fancy shoes. It's actually a real shame that they can't use the Spark Guards. So this is one of the very, very few classes I would say maybe consider a Spark Guard ring on, because you can potentially go and plant them on top of something like the Lava in Nibith's fight and create a sort of debuff blender while having them off to the sides by pairing them up with a Terranite. So like Terranites plus these guys are very, very strong for utterly decimating a party. So yeah, just kind of something to consider there. And if you're wondering why I have the Azure necklace on her, it's not a stats thing. It's just canonically her and Denim are implied to be dating. So you know what? I kind of figured he probably handed his necklace over to her at some point. It seemed like a bit of a wholesome moment. Anyway, y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and thank you for stopping by. Later.